I'm really pleased to introduce our next panel, which is on the role of the human, as we talked about before the break, cyber skills in 2030. It will be chaired by the Principal Cyber Specialist at the Information Commissioner's Office, Heather Toomey. So Heather, over to you and to the panel.
It's absolutely amazing to be here today and to be asked to come and speak to you all. From my role at the Information Commissioner's Office in regulatory cyber, we look at how we might influence and otherwise kind of encourage the take-up not just of cybersecurity but of resilience as a whole. And we use our whole regulatory toolkit, so that's quite broad. At its strongest end, we've got those regulatory fines that my colleague Tim spoke about earlier that you've seen in the news, but far more than that, and in light of the thousands of breach reports we receive, we also do an awful lot of engagement advice and work with people. And people are that part of the chain that I think, they've been around for quite some time now, people, and yet they're not getting much better. So today we're going to discuss the role of the human in cybersecurity. I'm joined by my panellists. If I could ask you, Ceri, if you want to introduce yourselves one at a time, just briefly, where you're from and your role.
So my name's Gerry. I'm currently working for a software house called Mindera, where I've only worked for about 3 months. And previous to that, I worked as an information security specialist at the Lego Group in Denmark. And before that, I worked in the UK at NatWest Bank, and I worked for 8.5 years in the NCSC researching people-centric security and how do we bring security to people in a way that is more useful and thoughtful.
Hi, I'm Chris Ensor. I'm the mystery NCSC person. So I'm Deputy Director for Cyber Growth. I look after things like Cyber First, Cyber Essentials, some of you may have heard of a couple of those, and various other kind of bits and pieces in terms of how do we build capability nationally to sort of manage our cybersecurity risks.
Hi, my name is Sasse. I'm the Professor of Human Centered Security at Toomey University, both in Germany and also still at University College London. And I've been looking at human behavior in security for about 30 years.
Morning all, Gerry McQuaid. I'm the Director for Security and Resilience Monitoring and Supervision in Ofcom, so looking after the Telecoms Security Act and NIS Directive, etc. But in previous lives, I've worked through the vendor community, the operator community and other areas, so very keen proponent of the use of human skills in cybersecurity and security more generally.
Thank you. I think what's very clear is we have a very, very informed and experienced panel. And so if I could just kick us off, and Ceri, if I could come to you first, what do you see as the role of the human as we look at emerging technologies, as we look at the developing world? Where do we fit as people?
Well, essentially, obviously, we are all human beings, we are all people, so we are vital within the system that these pieces of technology operate. And I think the role of the human is that we need to consider actually what are the needs of people and what are the needs given their role, given their situation, so we can learn how to actually understand and support them in the moment that they need it, instead of thinking, well, we can just train them or give them more information. Actually thinking about how do we break that down in a way where people are part of the process, they can take part in the process, they feel confident, they feel capable, instead of just seeing people as this thing that we don't have to deal with or something that the technology can eliminate out of it. But realistically, all of the elements in the system are designed by people, created by people, managed by people, and so understanding the human as such is vital. And at the moment, we don't really do that because what we focus on is more how do we look at that piece of technology to do something when you can toggle things on and off, add in controls. But a person isn't an asset in the system. They're not a control. They're a person with a life. They're a person with hopes and dreams and other things going on. So how do we actually learn and understand how to embed that well? Takes time and consideration and reflecting that we don't know that and we don't know how to manage that well at the moment is really important.
Thank you. And Gerry, if I can come to you, when we look at regulation and the number of incidents and breaches, do you think there's still a mentality that the tech is the responsible party? Do you think we can sort of bring in that design development issue? What's your sort of feeling about incidents and how we get people to sort of take ownership of that?
I think looking at the benefits of using people to best effect is actually a more important thing than what people can do wrong. And of course they do things wrong as well. But but if I go back to previous roles I've had, in my last 2 roles, I had a psychologist on the team specifically to ensure that our human security aspects were dealt with as effectively as our technology or physical security as well. So I think it's actually an intrinsic aspect. And I've heard in recent times, I don't know, I can't stand over this statistic, but I will quote it. It was 63% of cyber events occur because the human didn't do what they were told. That may be debatable, but there is a human factor in many cybersecurity incidents. It's not just about having a technology control in place. And if we think of high assurance systems, they will have multiple people and multiple technology controls in place to ensure that it is looked after, crypt key management, for example. But in others, that's not necessarily the case. So one other aspect as well, having the information relating to security events, that can be analysed, but it can be hard to make it actionable for a person. So the technology system supporting the human in making that decision is really, really important as well. It's not just a case of having lots of data on a screen, etc. But sometimes the human is the part who breaks that cycle, so to speak. Again, in my last place, we had CCTV watching the place, and there was the person, he would find patterns and notice things that no AI system noticed. Didn't like interacting with the rest of us much, but he was absolutely brilliant. And to the point where the police would call in at night and go, have you seen anything in the neighborhood? And other embassies would phone as well, going, have you seen anything unusual? And we've all seen the demos, the AI system with the red box, etc., pointing out what's wrong. And that's not right. And he just brilliant. And to this day, I take my hat off to him to this day. And the other thing is he loved it. Why not take advantage of that? He was just really, really good at it. But bringing it back to something a little more technical as well, and R&D. 20 years ago, we would see telecom systems designed by people in it, what some might describe as a ponderously slow process. But they knew how to build reliability and resilience into a system. And the fail fast, fix quickly isn't really what we need for safety critical systems. Well, actually, it'd be a bit stronger than that. It's not what we need in safety critical systems. So getting that experiential aspect in there is something we absolutely need, that human-centered knowledge base to and take advantage of it. So yeah, I think there's quite a few there, but that experience and the competence to oversee what's happening, particularly on the R&D side. And then given the room we're in here, as regulators, we also need to be able to understand that and make sure that we know what we're dealing with when we're talking to our regulated entities.
Thank you. Angela, I saw you sort of nodding along there and looking at the systems and where people fit. I know your work's quite in depth in that area. Could you tell us a bit more?
Well, I wish that people would look at it in the same way that Gerry does. In general, we just don't see that. Really, a lot of security, it's a paper tiger. It's compliance theater, and in the academic literature, we've really seen the emerging discussion around responsibilization, basically meaning that the responsibility is just pushed down the chain and it's being done on end users and consumers, and nobody takes responsibility for making sure they have the capability and the capacity to actually discharge that responsibility that's being placed on them. The most egregious one that basically I started my research career in this area by looking at password policies and publishing a paper called Users Are Not the Enemy in 1999 that basically showed that the standard human memory isn't built to deal with the standard password policies. We've seen a lot of progress in this area, that we have basically really low effort, low friction ways of authenticating. but we also still have many service providers having a single factor, one-step password systems with really egregious password rules, giving advice, about password complexity, which we know from a scientific point of view is absolutely useless and you shouldn't do that, with mandating that you should change your password regularly, which we know from the scientific point goes against, And so we are really not, in my observation is, even though some technical progress has been made and we could make it easier for people to do the secure thing, those who have the responsibility for it aren't really many of them still don't do it. They don't really think about how to make it easy for the users to do the right thing. And that's really the first, so, and there's still this really toxic discourse around where you talk about basically people, the weakest link and, and they're stupid and their greatest vulnerability, that's victim blaming. You're basically giving people impossible tasks in the name of security, and then you blame them because it failed to actually discharge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there's a cultural element there that I think we'll probably draw out in a little while. I think that's quite important. And I noticed you talk about skills and having the capacity and the capability. And I know that, Chris, this is something that you and the NCSE particularly are constantly looking to see how you can support that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just want to pick up from both Gerry and Angela, which is, I'm expected to do a few things with my car, like keep the tyres pumped up, check the oil occasionally, and make sure the windscreen washer's kind of there. The rest of the time I take it around the garage because it goes well beyond my skills. And I think there are certain things that we expect of users, but we can't. But at the moment, I think in tech we expect far too much of them. We expect them to change the brakes and replace bits that and that's completely unfair. And then we blame them. So definitely picking up on both. And so for me, my focus on the human world is really in the root causes, which is in the development of how we build systems in the first place. We need to be building systems where the users can do what the hell they like, but at the end of the day they can't break anything, and that should be that's how and that's how most of our tech works. I can give my father my phone. He's 93, and I'll go just have to play around with it. I know he can't break it. Ish. Still struggles with Amazon, other casters are available, but it's been built. But when it comes to security, we don't have that mindset. So for me, it's about how do we get stuff to be developed that doesn't make people less secure. It's things like, DCIT recently published the Software Security Code of Practice. What that is an attempt to do is to set down on paper the sorts of things you'd expect a developer to do so that what they produce doesn't make you more vulnerable by buying it. We know, buffer overflows being around since first recorded about 1971 in the Anderson report. How long ago was that? That's coming up for 50 years ago. It's a long time, but yet we still, that's one of the things that gets exploited today because people still use functions that are intrinsically unsafe. So, and then so you could say, well, I blame the developers, I blame those coders for they're not doing it properly. But then the coders work for companies and the companies want their products out because ultimately it's the products need to be first to market. And then you think, okay, but what about liabilities then? Because software as a service is not a product. So there's no liability there for producing shoddy code. So if you at the end of the day, it's not a product, it doesn't come under the Consumer Product Act. So where is the onus on the companies then to ensure that what their developers are doing produces good code? Because that might slow them down. They have to do more testing. So I think for me that there's a really interesting kind of series of like you start with the developer and go, actually it's not his fault or her fault. The company's requiring them to do this really quickly. Why are they doing that? Well, hang on, where's the liability situation? So actually they can legitimately get away with it because they're not held to account for it. So I love looking at that train and where do you end up with the root cause and how can you fix the root cause? So ultimately, the end user, the poor end user who could just about change their, do the water in their car or whatever, doesn't have to worry about all those things. So for me, that is the focus, because that takes away a lot of the root cause challenges. But how do you build those skills is quite the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And, we talk about privacy by design, a lot of the ICO, but we also talk about security by design. And I think it's quite simplistic as a phrase, but quite hard to do. Certainly, as a professional who's been in the industry almost 30 years, I've probably been responsible for some of those coding errors very early on in my career. Definitely, we tried things out, I guess, would be we definitely were inventive. So, looking forward as well, and seeing the rise of the social engineering attacks and scams, the implications of those are quite different, I would guess, to what we've seen previously. Gerry, if I can come to you, in terms of AI and that ability to I guess, target the human in a more efficient and effective way, would you agree with that? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think there's undoubtedly good evidence out there that shows that is actually possible. If you look at Fraud GPT, you can get Chat GPT, you can also get Fraud GPT. It's very, very good at building up a scams framework to enable you target specific, if you were to do it, target specific banks, other organizations, and make yourself look entirely believable. And that's across email and messaging platforms. And it keeps up. It updates itself. If the bank changes its logo or a message on the bottom, it will keep up to make it look like that. So these tools are out there. They create these scams, and they have a high degree of automation and enable the fraudsters to get the money out as well. It's not just the presentation aspect of getting the message across and tricking people into taking action and all those other factors like urgency, etc. But it also helps get the money out the back end. But that doesn't mean we just throw our hands in the air and go, it's all too hard and it's AI. People can do things as well, and also we can use AI as a tool, and we need to look at it as a tool, not as some demon in the corner or something. They can defend as well. So, there are undoubtedly negative outcomes. People do lose money and lose plenty of it, but on occasion there can be those people who are actually quite technology savvy as well. It's not just the perception of people who don't understand technology get caught out. It definitely catches out many others as well. And I'm thinking back to the cycles of tools and capabilities that can be used. Back in 1999, I remember doing RF fingerprinting for analog phones. The utility of that reduced as technology tolerances the manufacturing tolerances were made much better, so it became less useful. It's coming back. Things like that do arrive. I think the key thing about AI is it's faster, and it's making it much more accessible and much more quick. And I suppose getting relatively close to scams as well. With NCSE, we run a program called T-Best, where we do penetration testing on telecoms networks with their agreement, of course. But that's and C-Best for banking as well. And we will use tools like sending phishing messages and making them look good to personal emails of the individuals in the operator themselves. And I've heard retorts of, well, that's not fair. You shouldn't be targeting the personal emails, but of course, that's what other threat actors will do. So we have to follow those same aspects. And I think that's a really important part is, but it's the people actually who are being targeted, not necessarily just the systems, and bringing that together. And AI can be used as a tool to defend, to spot these patterns across. There are other things we can do just to avoid the risk altogether, but for the minute, that's one of the things we are certainly looking at, we work with. And I suppose in summary, I think let's look at AI as a tool, not as just a completely negative thing, because it can be used to defend, but in combination with a person.
Thanks, Gerry. And Gerry talking about his work with NCSC, is that something that's reflected in the work you're doing, and the fact that that human role. Is there a different need as we move to emerging technology and increasing scams in terms of awareness, moving towards a more proactive skills-led approach?
AI will allow that scale. Rather than at the moment somebody can get out 5,000 scam emails or whatever it happens to be, there could be 5 million. And you don't need a small, it's only a very small proportion of those. And I still come back to, let's make sure the technology is the kind of safety net for users, and it's up to all, many of the banks and the telcos or whatever to be able to make sure that they are protecting their users. I think that's the important thing, and they're using AI, and as it says, in a positive way, to actually spot things. Just because I've just coming from an IP address in the UK and I'm suddenly coming from an IP address in Nigeria or wherever it happens to be. Maybe a bit of an obvious thing there. Could that be spotted quite quickly? So for me, it always just comes back to, is there more we can do with the technology? We're heavily pushing passkeys at the moment, as the sort of, how do we get rid of passwords? Even multi-factor authentication is not the best, but how do you get that strong authentication? That's kind of where passkeys come in. If we can get that adopted, it'll really make a massive difference in how, and no doubt the scammers will find a way around, they will find a way around it. It is an arms race at the end of the day. But you just keep making it harder and harder for them. And I think that's the key thing. And how do we get this technology adopted as quickly as possible to be able to counter what we're seeing? So that for me is the key thing, is we need to use technology against scammers as quickly as they are adopting it.
I think that's a really great phrase, is that arms race phrase, because I think that very much does form a picture in your mind of the scale and magnitude of what's happening at the moment. Ceri, I know we've talked about the human role, and we've touched on skills. I'm just interested to hear a bit more about training and where that might play a part. And is it just simply training, inverted commas, cyber, or is it really around training of the tools that are being used? And certainly that's something that I've heard in other sort of sessions that I've been involved in, that maybe we're rushing us and sometimes adoption, and maybe there's training there that's missing. Anything you've got thoughts around that?
The one thing I will say is that a lot of the world of cyber leverages against, well, we can just train people, and once we've told them what to do, they'll do the thing that we expect. And we have to realise that doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for over 20 years, and yet we repeat the same training methods that we did back then. For example, I will say, so sending phishing emails to people to a personal email address is not really teaching them anything. You're proving that they will get something wrong, but what's the learning that they get from that? You know already before you go ahead with doing it that you've curated it to such an extent that they're going to fail and they're going to fall for it, probably. What the result of that is that in actual fact, people will feel the blame and they will feel shame, not because you mean to make them feel that way, but because that's how cyber has built people to perceive security over the last 20 years, is that it's something to be afraid of, that it's something that they're not capable of doing, it's something that they can't achieve because it's for technical people. And so we've always kept it at a relative distance from them, which means that when it comes to then, if they fall for something which is real, telling people or helping them and supporting them becomes a much harder thing to do, because they're no longer really open to you, not because they're doing anything wrong, but their instinct is that they feel shame and they close down. So learning is no longer about just then telling them information. And what happens with, say, phishing simulations is that you'll fail a phishing simulation and then you get instantly told you need to do more training to tell you how to spot the phishing simulation. But phishing simulations are just one aspect of A, cybersecurity, and B, most of the stuff in phishing simulations is not realistically, because the things we never really teach people, and we haven't taught them from the beginning, is it's not about the link, it's not about anything really in the email that is an attachment or so forth. It's all about psychology. The psychology of being manipulated has always kind of been the same. The scale may have changed due to AI and other things, but realistically, the techniques of the psychological manipulation that you go through. So recognizing that is really, really important. But what we do is we don't tell that story through training. We don't tell that story in any way. What we do is we just think, well, what you can do is just look at the email address and then you'll know, or you can hover over a link. And I will say to people, and I've argued with many a CISO, A, you can't hover over a link very easily on mobile phones, which is where most people interact with their emails, especially if they're out and about a lot. B, they also can't even see their email address. And a lot of the times, I don't know if a lot of people in this room know this, but having run phishing simulations, and I have never enjoyed doing that, the one thing that has always come up is telling people how to report, getting people to able to report an email. That button isn't even visible on a mobile phone because the screen is so small. So they can't actually then do the action you expect them to do. So then what are we really expecting? So when you're going through the idea of how to train people or for awareness purposes or whatever learning you call it, it's thinking about actually what is possible, what is achievable, is it actually possible, and what do we really hope to achieve from doing it? And because thinking through the real purpose of what the training is there for is really, really important. Just giving people information over and over again in the same way, telling them the same pieces of information, makes them think, I already know, or I'm not technical enough to know, so they disregard it. And they've been hearing this for so many years now, is that we're in a state of actually, how do we get them to relearn information instead and focus again on actually, it isn't what you think you know, it's actually that this landscape has changed and we need to teach people different things to learn how to support them and take it from that angle instead. So how do we support people to do the things that we expect them to do in the moment they're expected to do it? And they don't need to know the whys and whats and the motivations of all people all of the time. They just need to know what is the thing that you expect them to do in that moment. Is it possible and can they achieve it?
That's really, really insightful, and I think that's definitely something to take away. And at the risk of derailing the session slightly, it called to mind an incident that I had many, many years ago with my youngest son, who kept really struggling with his vision. He was really, really poor-sighted, and we kept going to the opticians, kept putting him in front of various doctors, and he seemed to do all right on the eye test. And he came out one day and was sat in the back of the car, and he was singing the eye chart to me. And I said, "What is that?" And he went, "It's the eye chart." And I said, "Well, can you see it?" He went, "No, but you told me it was a test, so I've practiced." So I think that's, that attitude, isn't it? And so, Angela, I saw you, at the corner of my eye, definitely nodding there. And specifically around the technological changes, anything really to add to that in terms of the way we approach it?
Yeah, first of all, I'd actually like to just emphasize, basically, bravo to Ceri for pointing this out. I mean, really, just if you have a quiet 5 minutes, just sit back and think what we're doing at the moment. This compliance theater, this box ticking of, all employees have been trained. Right, but we're basically then buying the cheapest off-the-shelf product. Most companies do, basically noodle everybody through it, right, with no adaptation for people already know this, and can I just point out, it's not just that you're basically tipping people further. It's like, we're complaining that we aren't productive enough, right? This is because we're wasting people's time and energy on telling them stuff they already know, telling them stuff that isn't relevant to them in a language, that doesn't, but we're getting the tick for compliance. So, but the other thing is like psychology, but it's also, most people don't really have threat models for the digital age. And this is becoming really, really vital. And if we're talking about 2030, looking forward, we also need to start to become more honest about that part of the attacker is surveillance capitalism. It is those digital services that are consuming an increasing amount of people's time and that are manipulating their behavior every day, for hours on end, right? They keep, it's the attention economy. They keep your attention focused on stuff they want you to focus, they want the individuals to focus on, not on things they ought to learn. They should maybe focus on how they actually feel, focus on their happiness, focus on their relationships with their family members and other human beings. I think this is actually one of the dirty secrets, that through those hours of interaction with those services, you're building habits, your attention is consumed, you're being cognitively overloaded, right? And that means you're not alert, you're not thinking. Planning and reflection in most people's lives has gone completely out of the window. They're in a constant state of what psychologists call tunneling, just what's the next thing I have to do, what's the next thing I have to do, what's the next thing I have to do, right? We're not going to get competent people who are really going to be good, sort of partners. And I think that's why I would suggest we need to look at some of these things more fundamentally and talk more openly about it. And my other wish would be is that we talk about that, we'd have, and I think generally, can I just say, I think the NCSC is doing a fantastic job. It's also doing a better job than most national agencies at communicating and trying to actually communicate to different audiences in an appropriate way. But we really, I think we're going to need in the long term a daily threat page, where an authoritative page where people can go and find out what's happening, what's developing, and so on, and where clear guidance, correct guidance is being given, And as far as one of my favorite is there's so much bad training out there, so much bad communication, so much bad advice, and it's all consuming time and effort people don't have really in order to get to grips with the problem. So I think a regulator should maybe make incorrect bad security as a criminal offence. I think that would help quite a lot.
I'm not sure that's quite within our legislative levers, but I can see the sentiment and echo it. I think we've got a little bit of time for Q&A, have we? So I don't know if anybody's got any questions for our panel.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a fascinating discussion. We've heard quite a bit about what's wrong at the moment with cyber security training and so on in really quite compelling terms. We've heard a little bit about what could be done to make it better, but could we hear a bit more about that? And in particular, going back to the car analogy, as you say, as individuals, you check the tyres, you top up the oil and so on. Once a year, you do have to take it to the garage for its service and its MOT. Is there a metaphorical equivalent in the cyber landscape? Is there something different that actually ought to be expected of either individuals or businesses?
That's a really good question. I think I have to answer that in two ways. So the first thing is, I think, the car servicing industry is a professional industry. So I take it to a garage. I don't expect I can do it. Some people can, but I certainly can't. And I think cybersecurity is a professional. It is a professional industry. So there are certain things organisations can do themselves, and we should minimise that as much as possible. And there's other things that ultimately they're going to have to go and get some support and help for. But I don't think we're there yet. I've spent 15 years of my career thinking we can train everybody in cybersecurity. And that is just not going to happen, is the reality. But we can train a good cadre of people who can offer those services in the way lawyers do and accountants do. The thing about we've been pushing Cyber Essentials as a basic level. It's not the solution to everybody. It's a basic level of, are you doing the 5 things that get most exploited in cyber attacks? And that's a yearly thing. So, it's a bit like an MOT really. So given a system, am I doing the 5 things I should be doing? I'll go and get somebody to have a look at it. And I think the independence is quite important, because when people do it themselves, they're always sort of over-optimistic, should we say. And I think you have to have a system in which somebody comes along and goes, have we really done that? Is everything being patched to 14 days that's connected to the internet? Well, that one isn't, over there isn't, but that was okay, kind of thing. So I think that's the thing. Like the MOT, you don't do it yourself, you take it to a garage. So I think something like, at least for basic level, then we've got the cyber assessment framework at a higher level, but you should be doing it regularly. You should be testing yourself regularly, testing your not just your protections, but your ability to recover. I think this was a big thing that came out of our annual review, is at the end of the day, an attacker will likely get in if they're really that determined. So are you ready for it? You might not have to go back to pen and paper, which I think was one of the headlines, but if you haven't prepared, that may be your only choice, is the reality. But yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah, I could give two examples, actually. Specifically in telecoms, in our code of practice, one of the requirements is that operators have what's called privileged access workstation. Technical term, but basically it means you can click on all the links you like, but it's not going to go to the internet because it wasn't internet connected. So why have humans tying themselves in knots, hovering over links, etc., when it just couldn't happen in the first place because we've avoided a risk rather than mitigated it? And we have standardized that with NCSE as an international standard so that others can adopt it. I believe the energy sector in the UK had looked at it too, but operational technology, ideal solution if it's implementable in that way as well. So I think one of giving people the capacity to deal with other things so that when they do make mistakes, it doesn't necessarily have a negative outcome, is really important. And I think we've taken quite a world-leading first step in that direction. Also, we call it the whole of society approach, and I think NCSE has been doing a really good job on that. But whole of organization approach as well. It's not just the security teams or the IT team's job to fix technology issues, it's everybody. That can go wrong. By example, I had someone come in one day, their laptop lit up like a Christmas tree. It was riddled with malware, and we were like, what were you doing? And they said, I didn't want to run it at home on my personal PC because I thought something would go wrong, and I knew you guys would sort it out. And, but they came to us and told us and explained it, so it's a bit hard to say, it was a delicate conversation, but sometimes it goes completely the other way.
Can I? Yeah, so one of the ways as well is also to acknowledge as security professionals, we don't have to know all and everything about how to communicate and teach people and to engage people. And the best way really is to realize that and ask for help from other areas. So in previous jobs that I've had, I've worked with people who are specialists in how do people learn, and then creating training that is based on those concepts, and working very particularly on understanding the culture of the organization, because as much as you can say security words, the organization already has an existing culture. It's not about creating a security culture, it's about embedding security into the existing culture. So using the words of the business is really, really important. And to be able to do that well and to do that competently is to recognize, I'm not a person, I can understand the issues of learning. And I have done research and worked with people like Angela for many years on these sorts of topics. But when it comes to the practice, I'm still not the person that actually does it on a day-to-day basis, but I can share my skills with other people that have other skills and collaborate and bring those two worlds together from with people from outside of the space that you wouldn't ordinarily think of, to work together on how to create training that is more, when I was at the Lego group, for example, the best piece of feedback I had on the training was, I really enjoyed reading it. And that was it. I really enjoyed reading it because I felt able to understand what you were saying, which made me feel able to do the things that you were expecting. And I thought to myself, that's it. That's all the feedback I ever need. But that took being able to work with external people to be able to give back to them my skill and to listen to their skill and bring those worlds together as well.
So I think that's the accessibility piece is absolutely crucial and something that's more relevant. We're coming to the end, but yes, quick question. I think we've got one more on the floor.
Thank you. I might try and turn the question about the role of the human round just once. We're increasingly hearing large enterprises talking about the transition to digital employees. They're suggesting they're doing that for two reasons. One might be cost, and the other might be predictability of the behavior of a digital human. Do you have any sympathy for that? And what do you think that those transitions might do to what we require of our human employees and our human assets going forward?
Does anyone specifically on the panel want to take that?
I think the first thing that I would do is basically check my investment portfolio, whether I've got any shares in those companies, and get rid of them as quickly as possible.
You heard it here first. Anybody else want to add anything before we? I think it's an interesting one, isn't it?
I was going to say, I think there's the idea that when these things are created, they become predictable, and so people will know. But they aren't, and they won't be, because everything's designed by people that will have something happen, or it will learn and evolve in itself. And there's still there's the one thing security is about is it's complex and unpredictable. And I don't think that really changes no matter as we move forward in the world. And it's being comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's really important, and being able to cope with that as well as an organisation of any size. Is that you're not going to get a nice tick box that you can make an auditor happy with. It's your ability to think through, make decisions about security, no matter who the people are or what you think may happen. Eventually, as these things evolve, there are going to be changes that you will have to cope with. So it may take away an element at some point for a period of time, but eventually that complexity will work its way back into the system.
I think we're just moving it down the chain, aren't we? Yeah. I think we're at time. Who's comparing you? We're at time. Okay, so that is the answer. So yeah, thanks for everything from my panellists, for Ceri and Chris and Gerry and Angela. Could we give them